Hey everyone, Matt from StrongerYou here. I'm here with Megan O'Connell from What's Your Strength, and today we're going to be going through some deadlifts. So Megan, tell me a little bit about what you want to work on today. What's giving you trouble with your deadlifts?
Well, for a little while I've been working some more on mobility, and I used to be a conventional deadlifter, and lately all of a sudden sumo is starting to feel better. I think it's because my left hip is actually starting to act more like a left hip should.
Yeah.
So I'd like to look at which stance is more optimal.
Sure.
Also, I've worked a lot on my brace. In the past, I've had a ton of back issues, and it improves every year.
Okay.
But just get your input on what I'm doing with my brace.
Sure.
And see where we go from there.
Totally. Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of back issues, is it more like SI stuff, low back stuff, mid back? Can you elaborate
Usually
on that a little
low,
more? Okay.
usually from flexion problems.
Sure.
And the PRI that you put me onto has been really helpful in doing some sideways crookedness, straightening out. So I got a little bit of scoliosis, a little bit of arthritis in two spots. But I'm starting to feel like I'm walking straighter.
Cool.
And it takes a while to come into the heavier stuff too.
Okay, good. Like your baseline is improved, so to speak. Okay.
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get into it. We'll take a look at just some basic bodyweight movements to start.
Okay.
Look at kind of your, like we were talking about a second ago, your baseline mobility.
Yeah.
Then we'll load you up with a bar, see how that looks, and we'll take basically the assessment, see how it applies with some weight.
Yes.
And then apply any more corrections or different exercise that I think might help you. We'll go from there.
Sounds
cool?
good.
All right, so starting out, can I get you to go through just a bodyweight squat? Cool, and just keep going with this for a few more, okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's great. And that feels like a pretty normal squat for you, right?
Yeah, I'm just a little pinchy right here. Like
Sure.
I said, I decided to not come warmed up or anything.
Okay. And generally with that little pinch you get in the left hip, you can warm up past that? Like once you get moving, you're pretty okay?
Well, the last 2 months, everything's changing because things are adapting a bit, but yeah, I can get it, yeah.
Okay.
I know I'm probably pulling a bit right, and I've been working on that.
Okay.
After looking at Megan's squat and seeing that she was getting some pinching and tightness in the front of her left hip, we took a bit of a closer look at her ability to shift side to side into her left and right hip independently, as well as her ability to rotate her ribcage and rule out any specific imbalances there. It was clear after looking at both of these that most of her imbalance came from the hips themselves, and we take a proper course of action from there.
So what I'm seeing on my end is there is a little bit of a difference, like you mentioned, side to side. It's not like you're totally incapable on one side and have everything on the other. It's just, it's a blend, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this will probably be like a reasonable enough load for you where it's heavy enough or if something's gonna go weird, probably will.
Probably see it, yeah.
But at the same time, it's light enough that you can make changes to technique if we need to.
Yes.
Taking a look at Megan's deadlift, we can see that her ribs and pelvis are both rotated over to the right. So her whole trunk is shifted over towards her right leg. It looks like her left leg is further away from her torso than her right is an easy way to see this. She's pretty consistent with it and she can brace through it. So I'm not super concerned about safety with it, but given that she does have some history with SI issues and low back problems, this is probably a good place to start looking. Her brace from the side looks pretty good. She's able to keep her lats pretty tight and a pretty neutral spine, pretty strong brace in the sagittal or frontal back plane. So overall, we're going to start focusing in a little bit more on rotational work in the deadlift.
All right, cool.
Okay.
That's pretty good. Feels okay?
Yeah, it's weird wearing a mask right now.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm used to that.
Right on. But otherwise, the movement itself feels
Yeah.
like a normal, conventional pull to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk me through it. From the moment you're walking up to the bar, what are you thinking about? If you were going to teach me to deadlift, how you deadlift?
For me, it's start with the stance. So get your stance just about shoulder width. Start with that tripod foot.
Yep.
For myself, I know I have to roll a bit.
Okay.
This is where I'll go to, right?
Okay.
So I now I do that.
Right.
Try and come up the legs, glutes. Go, okay, am I neutral here?
Yeah.
And then when I set, now I went to hook grip. It's much better for the week after. And then set the lats. Make sure all the lines feel solid. For my core, now I do exhale and, I missed the pelvic floor pull up, but exhale, pull up the pelvic floor to set the abs. Then an inhale, diaphragmatic brace.
Yeah.
Then hips forward to come tall.
Great. Yeah, you've got all the details.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So.
What's your strength.com?
Yeah, right?
Okay.
Banner across.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can do that just for fun. Let's go through a couple different drills. From there, we'll get you into some things that are a little bit more deadlift specific.
Okay.
Right? And then we'll get you back to the bar. We'll see how it feels. The idea being, we'll go through these drills. We'll get you back here, and without changing your cueing, I want you to just do a normal feeling deadlift to you.
Okay.
And see if it changes, or see if it
Okay.
feels the same, or worse, or better, or
Okay.
anything in between. If you're set up, if you're braced well,
Yeah.
when you deadlift, the right muscles are going to fire.
Right.
Right? Because you're very familiar with like what a good position is, like you mentioned, like setting up the lines where your body is lined up the way you want it.
Yeah.
If that's in position, you're going to lift well.
Yeah.
Due to some technical difficulties, we had some video corruption problems, so we ended up splitting this session into 2 separate parts. First session was taken around the beginning of December 2020, and second session was beginning of January. So there was 3 or 4 weeks between the sessions, which ended up giving us a little bit of a chance for Megan to try out some of the exercises we gave her to try at home and implement it into her own training and see if it sticks and see if it made a real difference instead of just something where it's an isolated single session and a very short-term change. Hey everyone, Matt from StrongerYou here. I'm here with Megan from What's Your Strength. And today we're going through a follow-up session from our first session about three weeks or so ago, right?
I think so, yes.
So on our first session we went through some conventional deadlifts. We took a look at Megan's hip mobility, hip strength, and we noticed a little bit of a rotation in her deadlift where her torso is rotated off to the right a little. So we gave her some drills to work on. The one that we found worked the most was an airplane off the wall. And unfortunately, the data on my card corrupted, so we got kind of everything up until the deadlifts in the session, but we didn't actually get the airplanes and the retest. So we're treating this a little bit differently. We're treating it as a follow-up instead of one-off session, which kind of works out. Lets us see over the course of a few weeks, and you've been training those as well, right?
Yes.
Let's just see if it actually sticks and if those changes are effective, right?
Yeah.
So Megan, let's go through these airplanes again. Let's kind of see where you've been at with them.
So where I was at was when we did it together, I could do like 1 with extreme difficulty. So now in the morning, because that's my like hour of power, I can get up to 5 in a row.
So show me what you're doing with these airplanes. Talk me through the process a little on what you're focusing on with these.
So this is about rooting down through the whole foot, kind of pulling down enough to get actual glute in it, not letting the shin or the foot budge, just a little support on the back. And then getting the hip sideways, almost pendulum, and controlling it and trying to get it out a bit further to each side. Just kind of nudge it out. This is my wobblier hip, so I usually start on this one to see how many we're going to get today.
Absolutely.
And I'm concentrating on not letting the shoulders move.
Yeah, so those are all really good points. And I'd say generally, that's how I'd want to coach it as well.
Okay.
On focusing on creating that full foot,
Yes.
right? Tipping forwards that your chest ends up a little bit past your toes, so you get a good amount of hip flexion.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And then you're doing a good job on trying to focus on rotating the hip without twisting the shoulders to make sure that the rotation comes from your stance leg, that hip, as opposed to you just twisting your spine or twisting your shoulders without moving the hip as much.
Yeah.
So what I'm seeing is as you're set up here, right, your weight is a little bit more on the inside of your foot.
Okay.
So you have 3 points of contact with your foot, but it looks like your weight is a little bit more in, so your knee and your femur point in.
Okay.
So without losing the ball of your foot, like your first metatarsal, right? I want you to try to get your pinky toe on the ground as well.
Okay.
And you see how that just angles me out a little?
It does.
To where my femur lines up with my tibia.
Okay.
As opposed to having 2 separate lines and like a break in that line.
Okay.
Right? So it's the difference between that and that.
Okay.
Still have the inside edge of my foot on the ground.
Right.
But it's just a little bit more pressure on the outside. And that's just going to let me drive a little bit more where I'm sitting in a more neutral femur position instead of internally rotated.
Okay.
Which is going to give me, again, more glute. And it's also going to give me a little bit more like medial arch in the foot.
Right.
If your foot ends up too much, like too pronated, right, your hip will kick out a little to balance.
Yeah.
Right? Because everything kind of ends up turning over this way.
Yes.
Right? So when you keep enough pronation in your foot to have that first metatarsal, but you also create a little bit more external rotation at the femur to get more weight on the outside of the foot.
Yeah.
Your foot and your torso, everything points in the same direction.
Yeah.
And then you can rotate through the hip
Yeah.
as opposed to through the leg.
Yeah.
And we're trying to create that separation so that when your legs are on the ground, your hips can sit more centered as opposed to being kind of stuck on one side or stuck on the other.
Leaning into the right, yeah.
Yeah. So compared to a few weeks ago, how are those feeling for you?
Smoother.
Okay. If you were to elaborate on that, like, is there a noticeable difference where you feel like I felt X before, I feel Y now?
I do know that I tend to sit back into there.
Okay.
And I don't feel myself doing it as much. So it's
Okay.
more like a lack of.
Yeah, that's a totally reasonable thing to feel. That's great. That's what I'm seeing a lot as well. So
Oh, good.
yeah,
Okay.
so what we'll see sometimes is if it's just a hip thing for somebody where they just have a rotation in the hip, their shoulders are going to be more or less centered in their deadlift, right? But their hip will be over here and they get kind of crooked in their deadlift, right? Whereas what I was seeing in your first session was you were a bit more like your rib cage and your pelvis were rotated together.
Yes.
Right? So your whole body was kind of over here, and then your left leg was sort of out to lunch.
Yeah.
And you were deadlifting, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, a huge exaggeration from where you were.
No, not really.
Right? But I mean, you made it work, right? You got
Yeah.
you got this far deadlifting, right? What I'm seeing today is you're definitely a lot more centered, where your sternum and your hips both face forward more,
Okay.
and then you're going from there. And just because your legs are really what's interfacing with the ground, that's what's planted.
Yes.
That's why I think that rotation from the hips that we get in the airplanes
Ground up.
made such a big difference, especially with some repetition, with a few weeks of training underneath your belt.
Yes.
I'm happy with the difference I'm seeing there. That's looking great.
Good.
So
Good.
yeah, awesome. In terms of cueing, you're generally thinking about the same stuff with your deadlift. You're just letting the changes from that reflexively change your deadlift, right?
Yeah, I sort of thought about bringing in a bit more ham, and I'm like, you know what? There's enough going on right now.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's enough things to focus on in a deadlift for
Yes.
sure. I'm really happy to see the change over your deadlift over the last few weeks. That's
Good, me
that's
too.
that's great. I'm happy it's as simple as doing some airplanes in your warm up.
Well, not just in the warm-up. I've actually been doing them, well, hopefully even twice a day, but it's not.
Yeah.
Usually it's only more like once. But I am throwing in a couple daily, even on a non-deadlifting day. If I do the airplane thing before my squatting, it also makes it a better squat.
Great. Yeah.
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 Makes it easier to find the hole
Yep.
and come out a bit. So.
Awesome. Yeah, they're a great exercise, and
Yeah.
I like them because you'll see a lot of lifters and coaches prescribe things like lateral walks or clamshells and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And those exercises definitely have their use, right?
Yeah.
But where I feel like it misses with something like this is they're moving their leg freely
Right.
on a pretty fixed pelvis.
Right.
Whereas in a deadlift, you're moving your pelvis on a fixed leg,
Yes.
right? So you
Okay.
need to be able to move your pelvis on your leg properly
Oh yeah.
to
Okay.
create
Yeah.
an effective change that's actually specific to what you're doing,
Nice.
in my opinion,
Yeah.
right? So an airplane actually lets you do that, even though at the hip, it is the same
Yeah.
action as, doing
Yes.
some monster walks or lateral kicks or any kind of like glute med activation.
Yeah.
I feel like that's going to be more specific because it's pelvis on leg
Yes.
instead of leg moving on a pelvis. And that's it with your conventional deadlifts. Thank you very much. Cool. All right. Boom. Like the information you're seeing, but not sure how to apply it to your own training? My name is Matt Taylor, and I'm the head coach and founder at StrongerYou Personal Training. I've been coaching powerlifting since 2014 and competing in it myself since 2009. All of my lifters have either taken medals on the platform at the competitions they've competed at, gotten over an injury that's been preventing them from training properly, hit PRs in their training so they're getting personal records and getting stronger over time, or some combination of those 3 points. If you're interested in getting in touch with me for some coaching inquiries, you can send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook or an email from matt@strongeryoupt.com. I'll leave a link to also get in touch with me on the Instagram bio and below in the YouTube description. Thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.